You are listening to the Eastern Conference Tuesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Ross Levitan from Locked On Senators alongside Mike DiStefano, as always, from Locked On Maple Leafs, and it is officially the dog days of the offseason, so what better time than to look at the future of the Eastern Conference? Who are the top prospects and which teams boast the best prospect pools? All that coming up on today's edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.
Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen on this Tuesday, July 26th. And Mikey, it is officially slowed down in the offseason, but that's not to say there's not still some great free agents available. What do you think the holdup is with Nazem Kadri, with John Klingberg, etc.?
It's a good question. I honestly, at this point, I'm not sure. I assume that some teams still trying to move around the deck chairs and trying to free up some cap space to try and see if they can try and pull off a deal to try and acquire these guys, which is probably going to take quite a lot of money to bring them into your team. And that's, to me, that's got to be it. Because at this point, I'm sure there are some offers out there to these players, but not to the teams that they want to go to, and probably not for the money that they're looking for. And they won't be able to get that unless some other moves kind of follow. And that's a hard cap world for you, Ross. Can't be like the MLB, where it seems like we're getting some big time trades happening this summer, or like the NBA, where they're always trading superstars. Tough to happen in the NHL. We saw one the other day.
Yeah, we got one.
But that is a rare sighting in this league because of the hard cap.
That was awesome. And if you are interested in hearing more about the Matthew Tkachuk for Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, and a first-round pick, I guess I should throw Cole Schwindt's name in there as well. You can listen to yesterday's version of the Locked On NHL podcast, where Armando Velez from Locked On Panthers joined Gil Martin. That's available to you on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcast, as is every Locked On NHL show. Local experts on the biggest stories 5 days a week right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But Mikey and I are going to dive into prospects today because it's the eternal optimism, right, Mikey? No matter how bad your team is, there's always the future to look forward to. And the perfect example is the Montreal Canadiens, who finished 32nd in the NHL standings, the first team ever to finish 32nd in the standings. But then all of a sudden, nobody's talking about that because they had quite the draft in their home city there, not only with first overall, but snagging a few players later on who certainly have some great upside. So it's the great equalizer, Mikey, the NHL draft.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's where you build your team. I mean, you can sign up free agents, but ultimately it's drafting and developing is how you win Stanley Cups. It's how you find success.
Look at Colorado
in the NHL. So, that's where you got to do it. And it all starts at the NHL draft. And some picks hit, some picks don't. Obviously, we won't know for a few years. But for now, yeah, it sounds as though the Montreal Canadiens had a really strong draft. I liked a lot of what they did, and they really bolstered their prospect pool.
Yeah, certainly. And you mentioned that's how you build winners. Like the Colorado Avalanche, McKinnon first overall, Landeskog third overall, Makar fourth overall, Rantanen 10th overall. That's how you build the nucleus of any star-studded team. And even Bowen Byram fourth overall in the mix there, a guy who really kind of got his feet under him. And to bring it back to our initial conversation, has kind of made Sam Girard expendable. Could that be a move that Colorado, of course, they don't want to make, but if they can move that money, then all of a sudden, maybe Nazem Kadri is able to re-sign and stay in Colorado. So that's kind of the intrigue here going through the offseason, too.
Are you saying spending $11 million on a player in free agency isn't a recipe for success? Is this the case?
Often. I mean, sometimes if someone needs to come home and they're at that stage in their career, you got to pony up. But hey, what different world would it be if Steven Stamkos ends up signing the year before in free agency? Do you think the Leafs are in a different set of circumstances? You got to blame the president of Canadian Tire. Didn't he give Stamkos a pitch and it just couldn't get it done?
I don't know ultimately, I don't know. But
that was the craziest day in NHL history.
It
Stamkos
was
re-signs,
50
then the Subban for Weber trade, and then it was Hall.
Larson.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the craziest 15 minutes in hockey history. I don't know how much different it really would be. I mean, like, I know Steven Stamkos has had a really solid couple of seasons, but there was also a couple of, injury riddled years also accompanied with that before this last 100-point season, career year at age, 31, 32. So I don't know if it really would have mattered. Ultimately, I guess if you could go back in time, just continue to build, and maybe you don't trade away Nazem Kadri anymore because, well, you had the money to pay him at that point because he didn't give it all away to John Tavares. And who knows what this team looks like, but we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to look at that. Today is all about the prospect, and we're looking at the future, not in the past, my friend.
Yes, 100%, although it is way too tempting to look forward to the potential, maybe not this year, but of a Battle of Ontario. I think that would make this show super exciting, at least for those couple weeks here. It's always the Battle of Ontario edition every Tuesday on Locked On NHL. And no, it's been awesome and great seeing the growth of all the Locked On NHL channels. So make sure you're subscribed to your favorite team and subscribe to your least favorite team too, just to get into the comments, have some rivalry, have some fun. That's what it's all about here on the Locked On Podcast Network. But you mentioned it. We're all talking about prospects today, and we're doing it power ranking style. So do you want to build some suspense, start at number 5 and work our way up? Or do we put the crown right on the king right away?
I think it makes sense to build a little suspense, go from 5 down to 1.
Okay.
I think makes most sense.
All right. I'm almost tempted to say we should draft it because that's typically a Tuesday tradition here on Locked On NHL. But let's hear your 5th. And we're only doing Eastern Conference. We'll save it's Jess and Brett on the Wednesday show typically. So we'll save the Wednesday Western Conference edition for them. So for the Eastern Conference, I mean, we're picking out of 15 teams, right? So we'll see just how much talent there is at number 5. But who do you have coming in with the 5th best prospect pool among Eastern Conference teams?
Coming at number 5, I have the Montreal Canadiens, the team that we were just chatting about. And I think that they come in at number 5 for me, a little surprisingly considering that we just talked about how good of a draft that they had. And they just picked up Yuri Slafkovsky. They picked up Philip Major. They already had Kalen Gooley. Lane Hudson was a solid pickup. You add that
Owen Beck, too.
Jan Micek. Yep, Owen Beck. They traded for Justin Barron as part of the Arturi Lehkonen. So they've got some really good pieces. Sean Farrell had himself a good Olympics for Team USA. He's hoping to make an impact with this club at some point. So I think they have a good collection of prospects that they've been able to get the last few seasons, and they've just had a lot of picks, right? A lot of flyers, a lot of darts at the board, and some of them are starting to hit. And the problem that I have, I guess, and why they're not higher on this list is I don't necessarily see any like future superstars. Slafkovsky, clearly their best prospect that they have. They just took number 1, but he's not even a guaranteed to be a superstar in this league. Like, he could be a guy who could score you 30 every year, but that's not a superstar, right? So I think that's why I have him at 5, despite having, a quantity of outstanding draft picks and prospects, but the quality isn't there like it is in some of these other teams on my list.
But where you get really into an interesting conversation is Cole Caufield, right? He just finished his first year in the NHL, but some of these other teams we're talking about, they have prospects that are older than Cole Caufield, right? And he could be that superstar of the class.
Yeah, Suzuki's 22 as well. But for I guess we qualified it where in order to be part of a prospect, we said they had to be Calder eligible still. Yes. So a player like Caufield and a player like Suzuki, still young players, but they are no longer Calder eligible players this season. So that's why, maybe they do have those superstars, and Montreal could be a good team in the future with those guys. But the current crop of prospects in their pool right now, I just don't see that like elite talent.
Right, and that's where just bringing it back to the team I cover daily, like the Ottawa Senators have the youngest top 6 among forwards in the NHL. The average age is 24, and we got some prospects that are still 22. So they've all graduated, which is why I don't think they're going to make an appearance on either of our lists, despite having such a young core who's already contributing at the NHL level. And not to stay the same as you. I'm hoping that our lists differ throughout, but I do have Montreal at number 5, and they would probably be closer to 10 before this draft. Like Owen Beck, Lane Hudson, those were 2 guys I had at the end of the first round, and they got them at the start and end of the second round. Yeah, well, Lane Hudson, like the way he fell was just absurd. And I know 5'7" defenseman, how often do they work out? I'm dealing with that right now with Eric Brandstrom, the guy who was supposedly the best defenseman outside the NHL once upon a time. Those days are only a fairy tale at this point. But this Lane Hudson kid, and when we did all of our draft profiles, we actually had his dad DM us, and he's like, hey, his growth plates are that of a 16-year-old. So there's room for growth there. But the one-on-one skill that this kid has is actually unreal. And you could see that shine through. Now, I'm always someone who laughs when fans get excited that their players did something at like development camp or in practice. But Habs fans got a taste of the Lane Hudson experience during their dev camp. The cameras loved him throughout the one-on-one drills, and he was making some guys look silly. So I think, yeah, the depth is certainly there, and I think they made the right decision, a difficult decision, but going with Slavkovsky at first overall. I think it would have been easy to just go with the consensus, take Shane Wright. You know, they've been looking for that bona fide number 1 center since I remember like they were trying to get LeCavalier back in the day, right? Yeah. Trade rumors, and then it was who's going to be next and who's going to be next, and it just never seemed to work out. So it would have been easy.
Suzuki will be that guy.
Yeah, he could be, and I mean the way they got him,
for Kirby Dach.
Yeah,
they got the number 2.
Dach's interesting too, and again, he's a guy who some would say, I mean, 2017, you're probably outside of a prospect at that point, no matter where you are. But I do think Montreal has a very strong prospect pool. And again, outside of those 2 mainstays in Suzuki and Caufield, like their team's pretty old, right? They don't have a lot, like the Josh Andersons, the Gallaghers, the guys who are like, next time they're competing, they're going to be pushed out. So they still have a lot of room. Like, did we even mention Caden Gooley, who was a huge part of Edmonton's WHL championship run? And is he going to be that outgoing defenseman? Maybe not, but even if he's just a 22-minute-a-night shutdown guy, like another former first-round pick of Montreal, like I see him in like the mold of a Ryan McDonough. Not to open old wounds. I know they traded him for the corpse of Scott Gomez at the time, but like they're building something there. Now, Caden Primo, I don't know if I'm super sold on him, but again, goaltending's kind of voodoo, and that's where I think we probably take the least amount of credence in terms of where at least I'm ranking these prospect pools, because one year they could be okay. The next year they're the best goalie prospect in the world. So I think that's probably the one weak spot right now, other than, like you said, there's no like guy who jumps out being like, that's a 40-goal dude on their prospect list.
Yeah, agreed.
Number 4, why don't we hit a quick break from our friends at Bet Online, and then we'll get back to the rest of the show. We'll run through these. I think we're going to get a little contention. I think we might have similar teams, but I think the order is going to be much different here coming up after a word from our friends at Bet Online. BetOnline.net gets you set for any wagering you need in the sporting world. Some say these are the dog days of summer, but I call it getting ready for NHL season. How do I do that? I look at the starting pitchers in every MLB game. I go to betonline.net for all the information I need, and I just start stacking chips one after another. I'll bet on, there was a hockey game, like second division in Sweden. Made a couple bucks thanks to my friends at betonline.net. They've got you covered for everything. Everything I need is at betonline.net, and you can check them out as well. So go there for all your sports scores, podcasts, everything. Have I said everything? Yes, that's betonline.net. It's where the game starts. All right, you're listening to Locked On NHL Podcast. It's the Battle of Ontario Tuesday edition, where we cover the Eastern Conference. With Mike DiStefano from Locked On Leafs, I'm Ross Levitan. You can hear me over at Locked On Senators. And I think it's probably fair for you and I to both kind of wash our hands off here after talking so nicely about the Montreal Canadiens, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, probably. Screw those guys.
Number 4 on your list, Mikey.
Number 4, I got the Detroit Red Wings coming in at number 4 for myself. Just because a lot of their prospects and big prospects have graduated from what we are considering to be prospects. Like, you just obviously have Mo Seider win himself the Rookie of the Year. You had Lucas Raymond was in the mix this season. Like, those two guys are going to be elite talents. I mean, we could see Mo Seider win, multiple Norris trophies in the future. He's that good of a player. But when it comes to their current prospect pool with those guys gone, Simon Edmondson, I think, is going to be a tremendous defenseman. He's going to be a great prospect. He is a great prospect for them. I believe he's come over and he's going to play this season in Detroit too.
He will.
So that's going to be great to see him on North American ice. But outside of Edmondson, and then they got a great goaltending prospect in Sebastian Cossa, who they took a couple of years ago. There was even some controversy, Cossa or Jesper Wallstedt.
Yes.
And they went with Cossa before, the Canadian kid from out west. So there was always a little bit of, did they pick the right goalie? He's pretty good. Wallstedt's also really good. But he's looking like he's going to be the goalie of the future for this club. They selected Marco Kaspar in the first round this year. I think he's going to be a real solid player. But outside of that, there's a lot of like B-level prospects, right? Like at Jonathan Berggren and Albin Grew. It's, some guys where it's like, okay, maybe they'll turn into something, but there's not a lot of high-level players after that wave that had just graduated for me.
Interesting. I've actually got them coming up a little bit later, but I'll make the argument here now. So I'll give it away. I've got them at number 3, so just one spot higher. And to me, there's one player in particular who's a bit of an undercover, could be stud. And he's not going to be undercover the second you see him step on the ice. He'll probably start in Grand Rapids, but Elmer Soderblom. 6'8", 250 pounds. So you're like, okay, this guy is just going to stand in front of the net or what? Well, 21 goals, 33 points in the SHL last year as a 20-year-old. So this guy clearly able to produce 6 points in 9 playoff games as well. And then, I mean, you're just kind of intrigued, at least I am, by the size and the speed. Not so much the speed, but the hands he has as well. He's scoring from distance too. So I'm intrigued to see how this kid is going to come over and translate his game. Obviously, we know that Steve Yzerman, they love their Swedish players. And now they've got Nicholas Lidstrom in the mix as a development guy too. So that can only help them as a whole. But on the back end, a guy who Lidstrom's going to be working for, Albert Johansson. I got some follows on Twitter from some Red Wings fans who are just super high on this kid. And again, it's a bit of a shot in the dark. And you said that's why you have them at 4, is like, how are these guys all going to translate? Because not many of them are playing over on this side of the pond. Like, I think it's always hilarious to see the last couple of years, because Theodore Niederbach is another one. These guys are just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of like U22 scoring in the SHL. It's just all littered with Detroit Red Wings. So I'm interested to see how they come over. Of course, Simon Edmondson's like the crown jewel of this prospect pool. Yeah, I would say so. Even more so than Sebastian Cossa. And then you look at another like personal favorite. Maybe it's the Nodak bias. I always appreciate the Fighting Hawks, but Dylan James, they got in the second round early. I think 40th overall this year. I think he could be a nice complementary player. But yeah, I think when you look at the Red Wings, it's more the depth rather than the quality overall compared to the teams that I have at 1 and 2. But they do enough for me to get a spot there in the top 3.
Right on. All right.
Like Joe Veleno too, like 71 games under his belt. I think he's only going to get better. So I think that there's a lot of options here that could become players down the road. Plus they got maybe the best name in prospects, Red Savage. You kidding me? That's all time.
It's not bad.
Not bad. So we'll see. But hey, just to go back and we'll see if you have these guys on their list. I have the New Jersey Devils at number 4. And that's after the graduation, of course, of Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier, who's actually already on his second contract, just showing how much time can fly. But I really like this latest wave that they have coming in. The last 2 drafts before this one, where they get the second overall pick, but they had 3 first-rounders in 2020, which is looking back already as an extremely strong draft. Then they get 2 first-rounders in 2021. I think they kind of flubbed on the second one, Chase Stillman, but you get Luke Hughes. So what I love about the Devils is that they've kind of addressed every spot on their roster. Like they have a couple wingers coming in Alex Holtz and Dawson Mercer. They've got a couple defensemen coming in Luke Hughes and with Simon Nemec. And then you also have this big wild card in all of it in Shakir Mukhamadullin, who scouts either absolutely love or absolutely hate. There
There's
is no
correct.
in between. Yeah, nobody is indifferent when it comes to Shakir Mukhamadullin. But where it stops for me, like all those guys I mentioned, they're all top 20 picks in the draft. They would be much higher on my list here if they hit any of their outside of the first round picks. And nothing's really jumping out at me as a guy who's like, oh, that's going to be a good value pick later on. So we'll see. Maybe there's going to be some surprises for me, but that's the only thing that's holding the Devils back from me from being a top 3 prospect pool.
I got them a little higher on my list. Do you want me to explain myself there?
Yeah,
Or do you want
sure.
me to go to
I did the same with the Red Wings.
Okay, well, I am at number 2 on my list, to be honest
Okay.
with you. I think that they have done a tremendous job building up through the draft the last couple of years. Like you said, like Luke Hughes is going to be a stud, like top pair, number 1 type level defenseman for New Jersey. And also they selected Yuri Nemec, number 2. So they've got themselves a formidable pair going forward. That's on top of what they already have in Dougie Hamilton. So that's going to be a tremendous, blue line for years to come for that club. But then you talk about Alex Holt, who I think is going to be a stud winger. Here's the guy who I believe is going to be an underrated prospect and someone who they did get in the later rounds, Fabian Zederland. I think Fabian Zederland has an opportunity. He had 8 points in like 14 games this year coming up from the minors. I ended up picking him up in a dynasty fantasy league, and he actually did some decent damage down the stretch. I think he's going to be a really good player. And Nico Dawes, who a lot of Canadians would know that name from him being part of Team Canada a couple of years ago as kind of maybe their goaltender of the future. And Nico Dawes, I think they took him with like a 3rd-round pick a few years back. So I think there is also, there are some players out there for sure that the New Jersey Devils can end up developing into serious prospects. But for me, it was more, they got some high-end guys in Luke Hughes and Alexander Holtz, who I think are going to be stars and like first-line, first-paired potential with these players, which is why I had them a little higher. It was more of a quality over quantity type of ranking for the Devils for me. So that's why I had them in there at number 2.
Yeah, that's fair. And Trey Matthews from Locked On Devils is probably just smashing his steering wheel listening to this because we haven't brought up Riley Walsh, who, again, 3rd-round pick. But he's 23 years old. So for me, it's like, are you still a prospect? 3 years at Harvard. Now he's already done 2 years in pro hockey. Like that's 5 years at college or higher. But I get it. Defenseman develops slower. And
yeah,
I mean, he's producing. He got 43 points in the AHL this year. And I mean, I think Trey gets a little excited about him. He says he's the next Adam Fox. I think that might be a regional rivalry. They're actually a pair at Harvard, so I think that's where he gets that from. But certainly looking good as a complimentary right shot defense.
Jack Rathbone's going to be the next Adam Fox.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Also a Harvard kid.
Oh yeah, so all right. So anyone who went to Harvard, then we'll just throw him in the conversation.
Yeah, Nick Abruzzese, that's the next Adam Fox.
There you go. Well, you already have my number 3 team is the Detroit Red Wings. So who do you have at number 3?
I got the Columbus Blue Jackets coming in at number 3 for me. I think that they've done a really good job. Obviously, guys who we consider graduates, like a Cole Sillinger, had a great season this year as a 1st-round pick, 18 years old, played in the show. But then they drafted somebody else earlier last year in the draft, Kent Johnson. He went to school. He's going to be playing this year. I think this kid's going to be an absolute stud. Kent Johnson's like a top-line player, absolutely. Played for Team Canada at the World Championships or at the Olympics. I think he's going to be a terrific player. So that's the type of star talent that makes you high on my list. Carson Kuhlmans, I think, is a tremendous defenseman. They drafted 2 other D-men, David Jiricek and Denton Mateychuk this year in the draft. I think Jiricek has the opportunity to maybe a top pair, number 3 type defenseman. Mateychuk has top 4 potential. They drafted Luca Del Bel Blues a little bit later in the draft. Nice little sneaky steal there for the Blue Jackets. And Kirill Marchenko is a guy who a lot of Blues fans are pretty high on. They're hoping that he can end up being a factor this season for the team. So they've got a couple of guys a little bit later, but they also have those top-end talent players as well. So for me, I had the Columbus Blue Jackets with the 3rd best prospect pool in the Eastern Conference.
Nice. I got them at number 2. I'm very high on some of their players. Like I thought David Jiricek would be off the board guaranteed at his spot. Well, I think he ended up going, what, 8?
Juracek?
Or 6. 6.
Maybe 6th.
Yeah, 6. Even still, like, to me, he was a no-brainer, top 5. And he actually got hurt at the World Juniors and missed much of the second half of the season. So kind of out of sight, out of mind. You got to think in a certain sense there with Columbus, or with his team in the Czech Republic, ultimately falling to Columbus, and kind of another wild card on all this. And he's been a wild card since Brian Burke and everyone else had no idea who he was when he got picked 21st overall in the 2020 draft. Igor Chinekov. Like, this guy, he just seems like one-shot offense. And wouldn't he be a perfect guy to just throw on the other wing with Johnny Gaudreau, or a guy who really can be a setup man day in and day out? Like, I know the easy call would just be load up the top line, put Gaudreau on one side and put Laine on the other. But I think if you want to balance the top 6, ultimately that shot can become a huge asset for him. He got 62 games in, so he's kind of a borderline guy when it comes to this sort of prospect rankings, but really interested to see how his career unfolds beyond that. Yeah, they got a few hard workers there, like Del Bel Blues, like you said, and James Malatesta is a big name in the OHL. I don't know if the skill will necessarily translate to the next level. Sorry, in the QMJHL. I had a couple really good years. Now, some people are saying Nathan Gaucher kind of carried him a little bit, but he had a real successful season playing in Quebec with Patrick Waugh's team, the Remparts. So I think that, yeah, you look at the quality and quantity. To me, that's what moves them up. And I mean, you touched on it, but the decor for me is really where this gets exciting if you're a Blue Jackets fan. Denton Mateychuk is kind of an undersized guy as a defenseman. I think he's about 5'10" right now, but if that pans out, all of a sudden you're looking good. And Nhl Tarasov, again, the goalies we didn't look too deeply into, but he's 23 years old, kind of slow and steady, but his numbers have been sparkling at certain levels. Like, he was in the KHL last year, .925 save percentage, played 4 games in the NHL, still looking for his first win, Mikey, but a .937 save percentage in those 4 games. So we'll see. He's just a beast, big goalie, 6'5", 200 pounds. And I think he could be a difference maker in goal for them. So I've got the Columbus Blue Jackets at number 2.
Yeah, and like Adam Boqvist, only 21 years old.
Yeah, what a steal. That ended up being, the trade was Cole Sillinger, David Juracek, and Adam Boqvist for Seth Jones.
Worked out pretty darn well, I would say, for them. Yeah. It worked out real well.
No question. All right, let's take a quick break, and then we'll get back to number 1 on our top prospect pools in the Eastern Conference. Keep it locked on NHL right here with Ross and Mike. All right, you're listening to the Locked On NHL podcast. I'm Ross Levitan alongside Mike DiStefano. You can find us over at Locked On Senators and Locked On Leafs, wherever you get your podcast. You can also tune in for local experts on the biggest stories for every single team in the NHL, MLB, NFL, and NBA on the Locked On Podcast Network. I want to give an honorable mention before we get to number 1, because I think we're going the same direction for number 1. There is a team, to me, that is head and shoulders above everyone else in the Eastern Conference. But I do have to give a little stick tap to a team that's competing year in and year out. How do the Carolina Hurricanes continue to just reload their prospect pool? Because they were right there for me at number 5, but yet they pick in the late 20s every year.
You know why? And I'll tell you, every year, like whenever you go and you look at draft Twitter, right?
Oh, yeah.
Draft Twitter, like whoever you love in draft Twitter, that's who they end up drafting. I swear. They look at Twitter and they say, okay, this is how we're making up our board. Because every single draft Twitter, columnist or whatever, always gives them an A+ grade, because they always end up picking the guys who are always skilled. They're small, skilled European players who a lot of teams kind of just end up passing over. And they say, okay, we'll take this top 50 ranked prospect at pick 128. Absolutely, we'll go ahead and do that. And they seem to be doing that a lot. And I mean, it worked out with Sebastian Aho. Turned out, no one wanted to pick him in the first round. Okay, we'll take him in the second round. He'll turn into a superstar for us. And there's many, many instances of that happening for them. I mean, Jacob Slavin was like a late round pick. And, they get so, I don't want to call it lucky. I suppose they're, just really good at scouting, I guess, and they believe in their scouting department, and it's come through time and time again. But they got like Jameson Rees and Jack Drury and like a bunch of dudes who they end up grabbing really in the mid rounds that are solid prospects. We'll see if they can end up, pulling through. I mean, there's still a lot of time for them to end up becoming those guys, but yeah, they're really solid drafting team.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side of that is you look, and over the last 4 drafts, they've gotten 3 games out of the first round, but still lots of time. I think, again, where they're picking late, there certainly leaves a lot more development track afterwards. Like 2018, they got 2 games after the second overall pick. Of course, Svechnikov's a stud, already 209 NHL points, but it's certainly interesting that they're always among the winners of draft day. And this year, they took advantage of a market inefficiency, in my opinion here. 4 of their 7 draft picks out of Russia, where a lot of teams were staying away from the Russians this year. Gleb Trikazov, one of them, Alexander Perevalov as well, and then Vladimir Grudinin, who a lot of, again, draft Twitter was like, how is this guy not gone in the top 50? And yet he gets picked 156. So a little stick tap for the Carolina Hurricanes there. But again, let's see some of these nice prospects develop into actual nice players, because since 2017, they have 5 total games outside of the first round. Not that a lot of teams will have much more than that. It is a 5-year game, but I did find that interesting. All right, the drum roll is ongoing here. It's the Buffalo Sabres, right?
I thought you were going to say the Toronto Maple Leafs.
No. I mean, I had to pull back here. I was going to just talk about Shane Pinto for 25 minutes, but no. The Buffalo Sabres have just amassed quantity and quality. It really brings together every other team on this list. It's like, oh yeah, a little more quality, a little more quantity. No, Buffalo's got it all. And they have 2 goalie studs, maybe even 3 if Pekka Luukkonen can figure it out.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's 100% Buffalo. I mean, first and foremost,
it's the biggest gap too, right? Between
it's no question. It's no question that the Buffalo Sabres have the best prospect pool in the Eastern Conference. Like, no question about it. You've got a potential, like a number 1 defenseman in Owen Power, who I think is going to be an absolute stud. He was Scott Wheeler's number 1 prospect in the NHL, drafted prospect. And you've got Jack Quinn, who was the reigning AHL Rookie of the Year, who I think is going to be a stud 30-goal scorer in the NHL. JJ Peterka, they just drafted Matthew Savoy also in the first round this year. He is somebody who has immense skill, little undersized, but boy, does he have the skill. Noah Ostlund was a real solid pick again in the first round this year. Yuri Kulich, you've got Isaac Rosen, Olivier Nadeau, and like you said, the goaltending, Eric Portillo, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and Devin Levi, all three could become starters one day in the NHL. They have that much potential. Like, take this from a guy who has sat here in a Toronto market who has not been able to breed a goaltender or even draft one where you say, hey, that guy could be a starter for us long term. You can't even.
Rask guy was pretty good.
Wow. Besides that, then they said, no, we're going to trade him for Andrew Raycroft. And
shout out Justin Pogge at that time.
And that's what happened. But you're talking about 14 years ago, Ross.
I know. 14 That's a long time.
15 years ago.
Who's been the best Leafs goalie prospect since then?
James Reimer.
Whoa.
James Reimer has been the best drafted goaltender.
Ian Scott had a sick year after he got drafted with Prince Albert. Remember, he went crazy. He actually
retired like last week. Yeah, retired. He was always injured. I think he's only played like 3 games since being drafted. That's really unfortunate. Yeah, because you're right. He did have an unbelievable kind of final year. But, the fact that the Buffalo Sabres have been able to draft and acquire, I think Levi was a Florida
in the Reinhart trade.
Yeah, he was a Florida draft.
7th rounder, though.
I know, but then he killed it for Team Canada. Remember, at the World Juniors, put his name right up there amongst some of the best goalie prospects in the NHL.
Even the year before, dude.
Eric Portillo, man, they've got themselves some really, really good prospects. One of them's got a hit, right?
100%. You got to think.
And here's a really underrated prospect who I think is going to start getting. He may have graduated in our circumstances. I think he played like 30 or some odd games. Matthias Samuelson
Yep.
is a player. This dude's a player. Like he's a defensive defenseman, but like this dude is going to be a real solid like number 3 defensive defenseman, really reliable in both ends. I really like him as a prospect and as a player. So Matthias Samuelson, his name's going to start kind of becoming, and maybe not necessarily like household, but that's a name you're going to want to know going forward, especially if you're in the Atlantic Division, because he's going to be a tough dude to play against for the next dozen or so years against the Buffalo Sabres.
Yeah, same kind of boat, maybe a little bit older, but Arttu Rustalainen as well. From he's been playing overseas. He came over last year, point per game nearly in the AHL, and then 12 points in 10 playoff games. Although
he had a couple cups of coffee in the show. He played for the Sabres the year before, and then again,
what the heck,
this past year
he left. Why'd he leave?
Oh, did he leave the team?
I guess. I mean, they still hold his rights as an RFA, but according to Elite Prospects, he's playing the Swiss League next year. I thought he was a stud.
I didn't think he was that great.
I liked him.
Fan of him. I mean, he was all right in the American League, I suppose, but I had him on my fantasy team. It's like a really, really deep dynasty league.
Yeah,
he didn't do a whole lot for me, so yeah. I wasn't a massive fan. I did end up trading him away, and it's funny now that he's gone because now that person got like nothing out of the deal.
There you go.
But I mean, yeah, he could have been like a depth
decent
player,
third line guy.
Yeah, like a depth player, but
right.
Trust me, they've got plenty other star talent. And that's not even including like Dylan Cousins, who's still, I think, 21 years old. Casey Middlestat, who a couple years ago finally established himself as an NHLer. You've got Peyton Krebs also, who we didn't include on this list, who they got as part of the Jack Eichel trade. And, I think he's going to be a tremendous player. Alex Tuck, like they've got some guy. Oh, Tage Thompson, who had an outstanding season. For me, the like most improved player in the NHL. If we had an award, I think Tage Thompson from last year to this year should definitely be awarded that award. They got such a young nucleus there, along with these prospects that we're talking about. Buffalo's going to be a problem for years to come.
And I don't even think we touched on JJ Peterka too. Like him and Jack Quinn, what they did down in Rochester this past year is nothing short of incredible. Like JJ Peterka, 68 points, 28 goals in 70 games, only to be one-upped. I mean, not in total points, but Jack Quinn only played 45 games and had 61 points. He was the AHL's Rookie of the Year. Like, that's an impressive system they've got in Buffalo right now. And again,
that's the tank though. Like you tank 10 years in a row, basically. Yeah, you're going to get a lot of high draft picks. You're going to trade a lot of players and get extra first rounders. Eventually you're going to hit on these guys. Oh yeah. Rasmus Dahlin also, 22 years old also.
Yep.
It's a number 1 defenseman. So yeah, they're looking pretty right now. Rasmus Asplund, who's a former first round pick as well, still a fairly young player who played well last year. They just signed Victor Olofsson, who's like a top 6 sharpshooter, who's also under 25 years old. This is a young, talented team that has a bright future, not only currently on their team, but also waves of prospects still to come.
Yeah, but not quite this year. Not when your goaltending this year is Eric Comrie, Craig Anderson, and
you don't like your guy, Craig Anderson? You don't feel
I loved him. I actually liked him last year. I thought he played pretty well, but you're looking at a guy who's 42 years old. Like at some point,
Craig Anderson, Eric Comrie to me is like he could be that sneaky goalie, man.
Yeah.
Like he had a good season last year. Limited time.
Like he never played. You know that if they played him 90 more minutes, he would have been an RFA. 90 more minutes. That's all they needed to do.
That's just dumb. But he had a .920 save percentage in 19 games last year.
Yeah, but like, Connor Hellebuck wouldn't let him play.
Oh, yeah, that's so frustrating.
The Jets locker room we can do a whole show on.
He's a guy who might be able to kind of steal the crease from Craig Anderson.
Yeah.
And that'll be a decent little tandem. I think Buffalo, honestly, I would not be shocked. I wouldn't bet on it happening. Like I wouldn't go place this wager at Bet Online. But I wouldn't be shocked if they were competing and potentially just just trickled into that wild card spot by the end of next season. I think that the Buffalo Sabres are going to be a much improved club.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Hey, why don't we finish off here quickly? Do you know your top 5 prospects right now outside the NHL?
Like overall or within the Eastern Conference?
Overall.
Oh, overall. Oh, man, I was only thinking about the East. I'll give you my Eastern Conference top 5. Like from the list of players that we have here.
Yeah, sure.
Top 5. So Owen Power, I think absolutely Owen Power is going to be my number 1 prospect. I don't think that's much of a...
Sorry, go ahead.
I just don't think it's much of a debate.
No, but he would be 3rd overall for me. I've got Matty Beniers and Mason McTavish, 2 Western Conference guys, 1, 2.
Interesting. I would not have maybe Beniers. It's close, but I would not have McTavish over Owen Power for me. Okay. So Owen Power, and then probably Luke Hughes. I go Luke Hughes maybe. Like, is another stud defenseman. Like, I don't know. Maybe I just valued D-men way too much, and I don't think there's many like tremendous.
I've got 2 D-men higher than that.
You've got 2 D-men higher than that. I'm so curious what your list is going to look like. Ken Johnson would be there up in that range. Yuri Slafkovsky would be up in that range, and then probably Simon Edmondson. Let's say Simon Edmondson.
The disrespect of Jake Sanderson needs to stop.
Well, Jake Sanderson isn't on my list. I said guys from my list of top 5 prospect pools.
Okay. Oh, just to the top 5. I thought you meant Eastern Conference. All right.
That's what I was just looking at the top 5 from the prospect pool.
I put you on the spot with it. That wasn't fair.
You did. So I'm like, who the hell is a prospect at this point? I don't know. Just Matthew Nyes. Put Matthew Nyes in there.
There you go.
And call her a day. Come on.
There you go. Get him in the mix. All right. Well, you can finish. You can finish off telling me how bad my list is then. Overall, top 10 prospects right now. Matty Beniers, number 1. Mason McTavish, number 2. Owen Power at number 3. Jake Sanderson at number 4. Simon Edmondson, number 5. Shane Wright at 6. Cole Perfetti at 7. Kent Johnson at 8. Luke Hughes at 9. And Uri Slafkovsky at number 10.
Wow.
And I debated Slafkovsky and Jack Quinn would be my guy right on the outside looking in.
Really? You like Jack Quinn as a better player?
I love Jack Quinn.
I think Slafkovsky probably would be the better prospect. I mean, that's not an awful list.
Thanks.
Like when you're talking about the entire prospects pool, I guess. But
yeah.
Perfetti's
going to be a sneaky like 25 goal, 50-point guy next year.
Yeah, I've always liked Perfetti, so I don't mind him being so high up. I'm also really big on Ken Johnson. Like I think that kid's going to be unbelievable. Like he's so good at Michigan.
Would you start him with Goodrow and Line? Just load up that top line?
Absolutely, I would.
Yeah,
absolutely. I don't know if as a rookie they'll give him the keys to the kingdom right away. I mean, Cole Sillinger already has a year under his belt. Maybe he gets the opportunity to do that. Also, another player we didn't mention who's super young on Columbus, Alex Tessier, who I really like as a player too. He's only like 22 years old. So, but yeah, I'm a big Ken Johnson fan.
Oh yeah. Absolutely love talking prospects with you, Mikey. We'll do it again, I'm sure, later in the summer. We'll get your top 10 list, the undisputed Mike DiStefano top 10 list. And you can't be throwing Nick Robertson on it, though. You can't. You can't do it.
I won't, because
who's your number 1 Leafs prospect? Because I know everyone's
not even Nick Robertson. It's Matthew Nyes.
Yeah, he's
gonna be a Nick Robertson's 3rd. He's my 3rd prospect.
Who's number 2?
Topi Niemola. I got ahead of both of those guys. Amirov's difficult just because, it's unfortunate. He's dealing with that really rare form of cancer and hasn't played in over a year, and you don't know what his future looks like. So, I don't even include him in prospect rankings because it's kind of like just,
see what happens.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to put him high up and then him not meet expectations and then sit there and be like, he was one time my number 2 prospect. He never played a game in the NHL. It's like, well, it has nothing to do with not realizing the potential. Can't call him a bust. I mean, we've seen that before where people have gotten in trouble for calling certain players busts without really realizing what had happened. Yeah. I don't know if you saw that, but I'm not going to throw him under the bus. But there was a certain company and they said something about I think it was Luc Bourdon, and it was like,
Wow.
you realize that.
Yeah, maybe do like 5 seconds of research.
Yeah, it was like, oh, he only ended up playing X amount of games. It's like, yeah, but
No, dig into that one a little more.
little situation.
Yeah, 100%. But hey, if we're talking about overall prospect pools, to me, Minnesota and Los Angeles are like head and shoulders above everyone else.
LA's got an unbelievable prospect pool.
Oh, yeah. Well, Minnesota, too. They just took one of LA's best prospects there and Brock Faber in the Kevin Fiala trade. So, hey, we could talk prospects all day. If you like what you hear, leave us a comment. We'll get to it next Tuesday. If you have any questions on prospect pools, leave us your own list. Who are your top prospects? As always, we appreciate you listening to the Locked On NHL podcast, making us your first listen every day. And we appreciate as well if you make your second listen another Locked On NHL show. You can go and find them on YouTube or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Mikey, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Matthew Nyes, top prospect in the NHL.
All right. Well, there you go. Now it's silly season. So for Mike DiStefano of Locked On Leafs, believe it or not, I'm Ross Levitan of Locked On Senators, and you've been listening to the Eastern Conference Tuesday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. It's your team every day.